driving projects with technology, going then into your philosophy of satisfying needs is great. I don't know whether you've done this deliberately or not. But it's fantastic. Congratulations. No, but it's really I totally understand. I can't agree anymore with what you just said. My understanding here is we need to focus, which is something which have not been mentioned. Now, countries, even in wherever it's a state, or even the UK, is going into themes, research themes, to develop certain areas for knowledge and capacity, because they are economy-driven, which is fine. For other countries, might be different. When we talk about strategic projects, infrastructure projects, and delivering them, that might be something that small countries might need first, because their needs are different. Now, my question, or something that is need to be mentioned here, is who's going to drive this? Is the strategic planning at the top? You know, for countries like Bahrain, for example, or Saudi Arabia, or Iraq, or UK, or it doesn't really matter. If you're going for economic growth and you have the capacity to do it, and you have the people who can uptake that knowledge and deliver it through research, and then implement it and take it and fly with it and develop your economic growth, or in fact you're developing super duper infrastructure that you need to deliver your economy. How that's going to be delivered, and who's going to deliver this? Because we cannot really anticipate that every university and every country will deliver something. What I like in the in the UK, that are focused. Really focus on the government has created a critical mass of research and activities to focus research on these issues, or on various issues that they drive, that's fantastic. But other countries, who's going to do this? How that's going to be developed? when the big picture is painted, then comes, okay, I'm going to go with Emily's model to go for capacity building in that area, or go into PPP projects with legal issues. That's really my issue here.
Okay, well, as we've got someone who represents a government on the panel, I think we'll start with Amelia, and because often these things have to start at the top, don't they? Because there's nowhere above that.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for that question. It's a very interesting question. And I think this has to be system-driven. It has to be government-driven. Yes, government has to be responsive enough in terms of its regulation and keeping up the regulation in line with industry. It's got to be industry-driven, where every sector of the economy does its own part. It's got to be people-driven, so the population or innovators have to really lead that sustainable and drive that sustainability. And it's got to be, just going back to my earlier point, it's got to be education driven. So and you mentioned universities are very good at driving this, but what if that was system wide? What if we created incubators, accelerators from the bottom up, from school years? Then you get to much wider. You challenge people from very early on, and you challenge the next generation to drive that sustainability. It almost becomes integrated into the culture of an upbringing of the new generation, so that when they become future leaders, they can all drive it.
Thank you. I think I spoke to Charles earlier about this, because every country has different requirements. The government are the driver of the car, if you like, and it's the people that make the car. In essence, it's twofold. You've got to see the people who have no financial gain start the process. A little bit like in Bahrain, where we all complain about the beach being full of litter. And then you get the party of kids or one thing and another going down and actually doing it for free. You see them in the local paper. So it's at the top and at the bottom, and depending on which part of the world it's in, there'll be different requirements. But you've got to see people who are actively involved for no compensation. I mean, they're probably more media worthy actually than the people at the top, as Amelia was saying, who who are driven by different motivations. So it's top and bottom, in my opinion, that needs to drive the whole.
I'm going to disagree slightly. Not to be contentious, but to be practical and more maybe slightly commercial about it. My view as part of strategic projects planning across countries in the Middle East, both the government level and investor level, is it'll be driven by the people who are paying for it, and it'll happen in the sectors where the money goes, and it will be driven by sectors that are deemed to be of prime importance. So, for example, in the Middle East right now, those things are education, healthcare, and social infrastructure. Those are the three, and renewable energy would sit under the infrastructure side. Because back in 2000, between 2005 and 2010, most of the Middle East countries set what were called their vision papers for the next 15, 20, 25 years. Bahrain has a 2030 vision, Saudi Arabia has one, Oman has one, UAE. And for the most part, they all say similar things, but they all talk about projects and about the social infrastructure delivery of each of their countries being a prime consideration. Now, in 2005, there was lots of money in the Middle East. There was actually quite a lot of investment in training initiatives. We saw the emergence of the professional bodies that you alluded to, Chris. You know, in 2001, no one had heard of the RICS beyond Dubai, and now they're everywhere, and they're hugely affluent, and they're doing very, very well. CIRB, for example, now CIOB have joined the ranks as well, and there are a multitude of others. PMI, for example, is rolling out courses like it's going out of fashion. But after 2010, we obviously had a major problem, which the political and economic stability of the region has affected the ability to deliver on those vision plans. And within those vision plans, one of the things that has been hugely affected is development of education and training resources. Similar to other types of businesses where, you know, we all wrapped up our marketing budgets because they weren't as snazzy as they were back in 2005 when there was lots of money in the world generally. We've had to tighten purse strings at public sector level and private sector level. We now have instances around the Middle East where other governments are paying for other countries' infrastructure development because that's just the reality of the economic situation we find ourselves in. So Bahrain has tried to do its bit. You know, we've got the National Training Institute here now, for example, which is doing great work. The Minister for Education is very driven when it comes to the construction sector generally, and it's a prime focus for them because of the link to the 2030 vision. So I think it'll be driven by where the money goes. And from my point of view, from sort of a client-end perspective, it'll be done by the people who are holding the purse strings. So you say it'll be done by people who don't have a financial incentive. My view is I don't think that's the way it's going to go.
I think both.
Thank you. I would again go with the panelists who think that the governments drive such initiatives. And again, I will distinguish here between the Middle East and the rest of the world. And we have prime examples of the projects success rates, for instance, even in Bahrain, when ministries had their own e-learning or e-government, etc. It was done in pieces which we never got to it. But when it was taken over by His Royal Crown Prince, we brought Amazon, for instance, to Bahrain, where everything is now under umbrella of one cloud. We had the education being part of the e-government. The same success rate being evident in UAE. Every project that Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid has sponsored, be in the education or the smart cities or even the healthcare, the health city, has always been successful because he's been sponsoring them, triggering them. Yes, maybe the ideas come from the specialists in each area, but I would say even in Saudi Arabia now, the new vision has all been taken over by the Crown Prince, which makes it more successful and the people driven from it. So it's not from each group who thinks that they have a revenue, then they can do whatever they want with the revenue, and those ministries or institutes that do not create revenues, they cannot go and spend it. So in the Middle East, that model is working very well and it's been successful. Just one last point in terms of technologies. Now in Germany, for instance, they have Ministry of the defense. They have created a few months ago a ministry for cybersecurity. Now they're giving it that much attention that goes even to the chancellor of the country to overlook the security. The same thing is happening in US. Thank you.
Another question?
Thank you very much. Yusuf Arayıcı from Turkey. I'm sorry, I actually missed some of your sayings before our panel session just finished. But I would like to ask a question. It's also a reflection on Charles' earlier presentation in the morning about sustainability. You know, sustainability or sustainable cities or smart cities, actually these are the two, you know, buzzwords we use, you know, in every platform. But which one is which? You know, I just want to ask, you know, if we actually think about smart cities or sustainable cities, which one is the right term or vision we have to use? What do you think is, you know, the relationship or association between these two terms is actually the same thing? Is actually two different things, or one is actually enabler for the other one, or completely different? So, you know, because Charles also mentioned, you know, sustainability as a term, or, you know, people based on their background, you know, they have different definition, they have different spectrum. Could be too wide, too small, just environment, or the whole environmental, social, physical, economical, or smart cities as well. So, you know, you can do the same interpretation. So can we actually elaborate on this, please? Which one is for which?
A great question. So let's jargon bust. What's the difference between a sustainable city and a smart city? Who wants to pick that one up first?
Does it mean about smart cities?
Well, you know, does it mean the same as sustainable cities? Off you go.
Look, in every part of the world, even many cities in South Asia, when they develop new cities, they always, 90% of them are developed with the idea of smart cities into consideration, because it's cheaper, it's, you know, more economic to maintain it, and it's scalable, that you can build upon it. The infrastructure that they put into the, you know, it's like building a hotel, and you try to put this all state of the art. It's easier when you build it rather than getting a 15-year-old hotel to, you know, to put cameras or you know, smart devices around it where the infrastructure is not built upon that. Smart cities are now is done on rural areas, the new cities, even in Egypt, the new cities that's been built, they all have invested in that. The cost of investment is now on the smarter technologies are reducing compared to many years ago. The sensors, for instance, which gives indication to the traffic lights, to open the traffic lights and open the doors for the kids coming from the schools and stuff like that, they've gone down 30 times. So it's more economical to do it, it's smarter, less dependencies on the maintenance, on the manual people. I mean, I mentioned earlier, the non-technological people jobs are disappearing, and there are more smarter jobs coming in, and people are making themselves redundant by innovating such things.
But it may be smart, but is it sustainable? Because what's going to happen when all the jobs disappear? What are people going to do when all the jobs go?
Yeah, well, that's what I was coming to. The jobs are getting more demanding, you know, so if you could get to a managerial level in a company by just being an accountant and growing into that job, it's going to disappear. You will have to keep up with the smarter technologies. Now, even executives in the organizations, they cannot get away with it. They will have to be part of it. I don't know in the education how much that is applicable, but you can't just say, well, I'm above certain age and I cannot, you know, get into that and I've learned my core business and that's going away. That is something coming up, and it's going to come up very soon, and it is a reality that's happening. It's around us in this region. So I think that's from the technological perspective, but maybe you can add more.
Yeah, well, we'll pick back. I think we've kind of worked on there.
I think it's an excellent question. And from a very basic perception, it's an excellent question. Quite often in my line of work, what I get is the scenario in a project team meeting, which I'm sure many of you have been in over the years. And the client or the investor, or whoever it might be, says to the project team, okay, this project costs too much money. I want you to do a value engineering exercise. And I think there's probably a realistic tone among us all that says there's a theme that the first thing to be cut in any value engineering exercise is anything that lends itself towards sustainability within the project. The key one in Bahrain, for example, that I see a big red X through every time is district cooling. There's an argument over what the CapEx, the OpEx, etc., it is. Do we really need it, or can I get 100 AC units from China that are plastic and cheaper and run off nice, cheap, subsidised Bahrain electricity, and I'll put them into my building? And it's the first thing that comes off the list. Now, I was in a project meeting 2 weeks ago, and the value engineering exercise started at 7 in the morning, it finished at 7 o'clock at night. And the document that was prepared by the engineers was split into 2 sections. One was smart, and one was sustainability. That was the 2 section headings in the report that they'd prepared. And the discussion that they then proceeded to have technically with the client, which is obviously not my arena, I'm just sitting there doing the lawyer thing, was, okay, which one costs more money? Which one gives me more in terms of operational income generator when the project is finished? Which one am I going to have to keep paying for over a certain period of time? Which one's going to help with the repairs and maintenance bills on my building? It was really all about, it was about money, but it goes back to what you've just said, which is, you know, you can build a hotel and you can put iRetina scanning into each and every key room for every key individual guest, but in 2 or 3 years' time, anyone under the age of 35 in this room is going to tell you that that technology is going to be OTOs. It's going to be out. You're going to have to replace it. You're going to have to deal with those systems, implementations and upgrades within each and every single one of your buildings. So are you better off paying for constantly evolving technology that make your city smart? Because this seemed to be where the engineers were going with the smart, sustainable kind of deviation. Or are you better off paying to implement the sustainability aspects of your building that actually help you with the long-term maintenance and life cycle costs? I've now done 3 examples of this in the last 12 months, and clients seem to be taking technology and making their buildings different to other people's buildings, snazzier, faster, quicker, you know, lifts that go through the ceiling and come back down again like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. But they're not interested in talking about the district cooling or how to better efficiency our energy resources within those buildings and so on and so forth. So I think I call it the basic level of the people who are paying to build these projects, they're thinking about dollars. And they're thinking about how their building will look better than someone else's rather than thinking about the long-term picture.
Yes, of course, value engineering is a term that means exactly the reverse of what it implies, because there's nothing about value in it, and there's very little engineering involved. It's in its nakedest form, it's just pure cost-cutting. But maybe I just sound a bit jaundiced, but before I will move on to Amelia and let her respond about the challenges of how we retrain an impendingly redundant workforce.
Thank you, Chris. And it's a very, very good question. I separate the two. Smart can be sustainable. Smart is the building block for sustainability, perhaps. But you reach sustainability when smart becomes smarter. Technology, as Paula said, will become obsolete in X number of years. And very rapidly, that sustainability you've built your smart cities for, will no longer be sustainable. It is a building block, yes, because if you integrate solar panels into new skyscrapers, that builds for environmental sustainability, it builds for energy sustainability. But in terms of retraining the workforce and my perspective on that, smart does, as Dr. Jessen mentioned, smart will eradicate some jobs, invariably. But if we go back to the earlier point I made on building an educational model that drives the economy and drives innovation, if those people are at the forefront, if the human capital is at the forefront of driving technology, then that retraining and the adaptability of the system will be a lot easier than it currently is.
Okay, and I'll just wrap up with an observation myself around the smart. And I think sometimes you've got to be careful what you wish for, because I mean, a good example. I mean, I'm very much involved back in the UK on things like modern slavery and exploitation of people, and it's quite interesting to see how technology has actually facilitated that. Hotels, for example, where there are no receptionists, mean that there's no eyes providing some guardianship of people who are checking into hotels. So sexual exploitation is much easier now because there aren't people on guard, if you like, in hotel receptions. So the crooks are using the technology. The other area for that, for example, is Airbnb, which is probably one of the biggest tools to prostitution going, believe it or not, because, you know, pop-up brothels open up all over where Airbnb works, because you can take a place for a week and be in and out before the authorities catch up with you. So technological solutions aren't always, you know, the right answer to some of the problems that we have. And I think one has to be very careful that, you know, you have to be careful what you wish for and think through the consequences of what you're doing goes, because we're now going to have measures in place to pick up on things like, you know, sexual exploitation and prostitution that have to be dealt with now because of the technology involved. So we end up with another layer of supervision or more exploitation happening, which is an undesirable consequence of some of these advances. So, you know, one does need to think through what smart means and really what you get at the end of the day. Okay, are you going to say something? Okay, we've got time, I think, for one more question, and I'll be asking for a very short question, succinct question, and then some succinct responses.
I was thinking about some issues. I was going to ask the panel about, in 10 years' time, how education would look like, or technology would look like, or aviation would look like. I changed my mind now. But I went back in time to check some technological advances. And do you remember when people were talking about the sick building syndrome and intelligent buildings, and those talks have been around for...
What we did for the CILB, we did a report back in 1995. To predict, we got about 40 experts on predicting technology.
Yeah.
For 2015.
But yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm just saying to myself, is it deja vu? I've heard it before, 30, 40 years ago. People are talking about green buildings, intelligent buildings, smart cities, and smart and sustainable. Where are we now? I don't think we have done a dramatic change. We have been just almost learning about it for the last 40 years, but we have not done anything really dramatic and revolution.
Let me tell you a story. I mean, can you imagine there, just sort of suspend your imagination for a minute, or your thoughts. If you brought a few hundred Romans over from ancient Rome to today and took them around somewhere, you take them to the airport, and the galley slave master would be really impressed that you can take an aeroplane and take 500 people 12,000 miles in 24 hours, and you think this is absolutely fantastic. And you take the person who's responsible for feeding the army and go and show him how the supermarkets work and how you get food to so many people so quickly every day. And then you take him to a building site, and he says, and the Roman builder says, well, I see you still use masonry and concrete then. You know, things haven't changed a lot. You know, and you know, you could see that over the course that, yeah, in construction terms, we're still doing an awful lot of what we've done for an awful long time. Now, maybe that'd be a good thing, maybe it's not. But I certainly know that my president now, who used to be the superintendent that works at York Minster, says her building is very sustainable because, you know, the materials they used 800 years ago are still around today. It's just a bit draftier, but then, you know, being a bit cold makes you a bit more holy. Any other observations?
Well, Rome wasn't built in a day, for a start. I think off the back of that, I like the front end of what you were saying about this idea about where will we be in 10 years' time, and that's actually what I'd like to say to you. I think one of the things we've been hugely lacking in sustainability and smart city terms in the Middle East is the law side, the legislation that helps us do our jobs, all of us. You know, the rules that we take for granted in places like the UK, that people, you know, in light of the Grenfell Tower disaster, for example, seem to think that we're over-regulated when it comes to fires. Well, I'm sorry, no. There's a very good reason why we adhere to rules. And the law is all about rules. And they are there to protect people. They're there to make sure we adhere to standards and that we do things in a proper manner. And I've been in Bahrain now for 12 years. And over that period of time, I have seen and sat on lots of working committees, consultations through the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Housing, government level, the Royal Court, Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Health, Bahrain Airport, you know, a wide spectrum of people who all want to do things differently. And if the rules were there to make their senior counterparts do it,